And I know people who have battle fatigue over getting COVID vaccine, like, oh, more vaccines. I don't know if it's more vaccines. I think it's more, why don't we come up with a yearly shot, especially for the people at risk?
Dr. Jonathan Bakhtari.
You can see it. I mean, it's crystal clear.
I think it's going to really revolutionize things.
Which is a big game changer.
Welcome to another episode of Bakhtari MD. And today what I want to talk about is how this pandemic is going to wind down. I know I've talked about on other videos about the pandemic turning to something that's more endemic, but really, I think things are becoming more clear. I think the Omicron variant, as is played out, has showed us what coronaviruses traditionally do, which is cause illness, but a relatively minor illness. And this really gets back to my point that I made before, which is coronaviruses, which COVID-19 is a coronavirus, have traditionally, comprised up to 1/3 of all colds that most of us grew up with. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago, if you got a cold, 1/3 of the time you probably had a coronavirus. So you can think of it as a cousin to this SARS-CoV-2 virus or the COVID-19 virus. So we're all familiar with this virus, and it's been a relatively benign illness for most of our lives. When we get a coronavirus, we get the runny nose, we get the sinus congestion, occasionally a little fever, but for the most part, it's just confined to your upper respiratory tract and your sinuses and your pharynx or the back of your throat. And so that's how we've known it. And I think out of all the variants, when you compare the original wild type variant out of Wuhan, and then compare it to the second variant, and then finally the Delta, and then the Omicron, what you're seeing is a slow return to what a cold used to look like. So really, in many ways, we can, with, being able to look in the rearview mirror, we can see the coronavirus causing a baseline cold. Now, then we have the SARS-CoV-2 version, which besides causing a cold, invaded the lower respiratory tract and the lungs and was significantly harder on people with pre-existing conditions and comorbidities and obesity. And then we're slowly, what appears to be, going back to what a cold used to look like. And we still have a lot of deaths. So I don't think we can say the Omicron is back to what a cold was, but you can certainly tell that it's getting closer than what the Delta and the other two variants were. So will this continue? Of course, there's no guarantees, but if we want to speculate, I think what we're going to probably see is this SARS-CoV-2 join the family of viruses, the family of coronaviruses that cause the common cold. Now, is it possible that there'll be still higher death rates among the elderly and people with comorbidities? Yes, and I think that really speaks to the path forward. So on one hand, we can look at it as going back to the common cold, but I think we need to worry still about the subset of the population who are at risk for having an outcome worse than what a common cold would be. And I think that's where the vaccine strategy is probably going towards. In other words, we really need to have a very, very elegant vaccine strategy for new versions of the COVID vaccine against the more common recent variants for people at high risk, elderly, so maybe anyone above 50 or 60, maybe healthcare workers, maybe people with a lot of comorbidities. So that's probably going to be the strategy moving forward. And I think as that becomes more obvious, and I think what you're going to see is a winding down of some of the lockdowns and the mask mandates and the vaccine mandates. I think what we're going to see as it becomes just an integral part of life, then we will slowly see governments and localities and institutions coming to deal with it, where we protect still the vulnerable, but as we've seen with Omicron, expect this to be Omicron and any variants after that to be a part of daily living. Obviously, we still may have to make some minor adjustments. For example, I think some of the strategies we've put into place in terms of having massive crowds for no reasons, or, still maintaining some level of social distancing, maybe the barriers at the bank, where the glass barriers at different places may not come down for a while. So I think maintaining some of that can't hurt, but I think slowly we're probably going to see the winding down. And you're starting to see that. You're starting to see countries like England, even New Zealand just made an announcement of starting to plan to back down on some of their lockdown strategies. And eventually, I think if the Omicron continues to wind down and any new variants, are as mild or milder, I think we're going to slowly evolve into what I call just like a steady state with a vaccine strategy, mainly for the elderly at-risk population, although anyone can get it just like getting a flu shot. Let's just talk about the vaccine strategy. So clearly, one of the things that, the series of original vaccines have shown us that with time, we see a drop in antibody response after you get 2 doses and even 3 doses. So one strategy would be to come up with the 4th, 5th, and 6th. But the good news is the vaccines, even after 2, 3 doses, while they won't necessarily prevent illness, they seem to be holding up really well in terms of preventing severe hospitalization and death. So if that's really, you have to really look at it and say, what do you really want the vaccines to do? Do you want vaccines to prevent all infections, or do you just want the vaccines to prevent severe hospitalization and death? If that's your goal, then I think the current vaccine is successful. I think part of that, without getting into the physiology, is we know besides the antibody response, there's a T cell mediated response. And I think the vaccines still hold up when it comes to T cell killer cells and other aspects of the cell mediated immunity. Even though antibodies are coming down, I think the T cells still are there, and they're able to prevent the severe hospitalization and death. So I think the long-term strategy is not necessarily to keep giving booster after booster, but as Pfizer and Moderna have talked about, they've started clinical trials of looking at the vaccine, which has been altered to target more the Omicron variant. Now, I know a lot of people, when they hear that, they start arguing, well, this is like whack-a-mole. The new variant comes out, we come out with a new vaccine. But that's what we've been doing essentially with the flu shot for decades, where we, figure out what the recent crop is and then come up with a multivalent vaccine, and we give it out in August, September, and October. So I think since the SARS-CoV-2 virus is an upper respiratory virus, which if it read the playbook on the other respiratory viruses, should generally peak in the fall and winter over time, then coming up with a new vaccine early in the flu season, meaning August, September, for the latest coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 variant is probably the strategy that we're going to see. So it is, if you want to call it whack-a-mole, it is, but on some level, it really isn't. It's just coming out with the yearly best shot to cover the most recent variants. And I know people who have battle fatigue over getting COVID vaccine are like, oh, more vaccines. I don't know if it's more vaccines. I think it's more, why don't we come up with a yearly shot, especially for the people at risk, that covers as many as we can. And we lived with that strategy with the flu shot. And, many seasons at best, the flu shot only protected you about 60-65%. So, but we thought, well, that's good. I mean, if it protects you from getting a severe case of the flu 2/3 of the time, that's a win. So hopefully it'll be better than that because of the mRNA technology. But if we can come up with a new version of the vaccine in the summer for release in the early fall, targeting the most common variants that we've seen prior to that, and then just ride out the upper respiratory virus season with that version of the shot or COVID shot, I think that would be a win and would save, thousands of lives. Again, if you look at the endpoint and say, I just want to prevent death and hospitalization, not I want to stop everyone from getting it. And if the majority of people, the vast majority of people who get it is just a cold in essence, upper respiratory infection, that's a win. I think trying to say, well, we're going to wipe out upper respiratory viruses is probably not realistic. So I think addressing the bad part of the SARS-CoV-2, which is it causes death in a certain subset of the population for the most part, is probably the vaccine strategy that makes the most sense. So a lot of people then ask me about what about natural immunity? And, again, I think the best way to sort out natural immunity is look at other coronaviruses. Generally speaking, you get immunity, but I don't think anyone really thinks you're going to get lifelong immunity from natural immunity. So yes, of course, natural immunity is going to be effective in preventing infection in the near to moderate term, but long term, if the SARS-CoV-2 virus is like the other coronaviruses, even natural immunity will eventually wane. So I really think that having this seasonal SARS-CoV-2 vaccine with the latest variants included is probably going to be the best strategy. And natural immunity, of course, will help people get through a season or two. I don't think it's a lifelong thing where if you catch the Omicron, you're good for the rest of your life. And we already know that because we know many people have already gotten reinfected. If to argue that natural immunity is good for life would mean that we wouldn't be seeing these high risk of reinfections. And we're seeing people who maybe got the coronavirus maybe early or in the middle part of the pandemic and now getting Omicron now. So will natural immunity give you some relief for the short to maybe moderate term? Yes. Will it give you lifelong immunity? If it's like the other respiratory viruses, the other coronaviruses, unlikely that you can just say, I'm good forever and ever. You're probably not going to get lifelong immunity from having an Omicron infection a month ago or 2 months ago. So I think this is why falling back on the vaccine, the once a year vaccine strategy is probably the way to go. And I would imagine that, once we get through this fall and spring, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a version that came out, let's just say, at the same time as the flu shot. The other really great advantage of combining it to either be in the same flu shot or you can give it at the same time, it's very unlikely. I mean, we already struggle to get people to come in for their flu shot. We still have 10, 20, 30, 40,000 people in the US dying of the flu. And we, for years and years, have been trying to get people to come in for their flu shot. I think it would be too big of an ask to ask them to come in one season for the flu shot and another season for their COVID shot. It just makes so much sense to combine them together, or at least give them at the same time. Because the biggest problem we have with vaccine-related illnesses, meaning vaccine-related illnesses and death that could have been prevented by vaccinations, is really a missed opportunity to give someone the vaccine. In other words, you go to your doctor in August or September for back pain, and you should be offered the flu shot. So we have to catch every opportunity to give you the shot, because the likelihood you're going to make another appointment, park your car, go up, fill out the clipboard, and do all that stuff just to get a flu shot is less likely. Of course, there are flu clinics and stuff like that, but I think we have to maximize. So in the old days, we say, hey, if the patient comes in for anything during flu season, don't forget to offer them the flu shot. So how much more that if they're coming in for the flu shot, you should offer them, if there is a new version of the COVID-19 vaccine, you should offer it simultaneously. Because if we are having trouble getting 330 million people to come in once a year to get a flu shot, I don't think the odds are going to improve when we say, oh, come twice a year One's for the flu shot and one's for something else. So I think from a public health point of view, from a missed opportunity point of view, we already have a lot of people who are used to coming in, September, October to get their flu shot. And we have clinics and what have you. It just seems like such an amazing idea to combine the COVID-19 shot at the same time as the flu shot. So I would be really surprised if this flu season, some version of that doesn't come out. So just to wrap up my points, I really think we're going to see in the months to come, mask mandates and some of the social distancing mandates and requirements and the vaccine mandates start to be pulled back, both here in the US and across the world. Again, unless some crazy new variant comes out, I think we are probably going to see that. And we're going to probably see a more endemic strategy for dealing with COVID-19. And I think the biggest component of that is to protect the most vulnerable as opposed to protect everybody. So I think we're going to move from a strategy of protecting everybody to protecting the more vulnerable, especially if the cases continue to be mild in people with, no risk factors. So I think that's going to be the way to go. Thanks for watching. Make sure you comment and like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Also, if you have any questions about this topic or you want me to cover any other topic, please leave it in the comments section below. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter at bakhtarimd.com for more content like this. As always, thank you and be well.